So today's fun-filled topic is vampire energy. In my prior bad narcissistic relationship that I was in, um, my ex they got the electric bill one day, and it was not nearly as bad as what I've seen some people's be, but they got the electric bill and they went on like this rampage about how they were so upset and we had to cut costs. And at that point in time, I had already unplugged like everything in the house. So there were no air fresheners. There was nothing plugged in that wasn't being used. Like the only thing that was plugged in was basically appliances. And so toaster was not plugged in. Power strips were shut off if they weren't being utilized, things like that. And so I brought up vampire energy and I said, well, if you think about maybe like the air compressor in the garage fridge, things like that. And at that time we weren't using the garage fridge, like there was nothing in it. But I was like, well, there's vampire energy. So that's probably, part of it, because they had raised a concern prior that we needed to lower the electric bill like the month before. And they would go into these little fits of rage, as you've heard in my recordings if you listened. But anyways, so I would always try to be the one that fixes everything and people please and make sure that they're happy. So like I said, I went around unplugging everything and it didn't drop the electric bill by much. And they would always be the one trying to point out everything that I would ever do wrong. So they were like, well, you went around and unplugged all this stuff and it didn't even matter, kind of throwing it in my face. And that was okay. I was like, whatever. But the moral of the story is this. So I brought up vampire energy, and if any one of our neighbors, family, friends would have walked in the house and said anything about vampire energy, they would have taken that as gospel. They would have taken the word as gospel, and they would have been like, oh, I'm going to have to do whatever your suggestion is. And they would have bent over backwards to make sure that they listened to whoever was talking. But because it was me, and again, this is a narcissistic trait, like the people closest to them, they treat like garbage a lot of times. When I brought this up, I got that look, the look of the darkness in the eyes and like sinister, I can't even explain it, but if you've been in a narcissistic relationship and you make them mad, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, you probably think I sound crazy. But I said all of this to say, they got that dark look in their eyes. And then as soon as I mentioned it, rather than just listen to me or hear me out, they had to voice activate their phone and ask Google about vampire energy. Because how could I ever be right? I obviously wasn't, in their mind anyway. So when Google was like, yeah, vampire energy is blah, and it like spit out the definition and things like it always does because it's Google, But rather than just, being nice to your wife or being like, oh yeah, we could look into this, it was more or less like they would rather show down with me about something that they didn't believe to be true in order to prove me wrong, just to make themselves feel better. But the moral of the story is this. So, one, if you want to save money, you can go around and look around your place and see if there's anything that you're not utilizing. And so if you have like air compressors plugged in or big appliances you're not using or power strips that are plugged in, but they're not like turned off and you're not using the things that are plugged into it, that will help save you some money. So there's that. But the other thing is that there's also another version of vampire energy, and that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like narcissistic people or people with narcissistic tendencies. But in addition to that, if you're an empath or a people pleaser, it's kind of everywhere. Vampire energy, if you're dealing with a narcissist or anyone that's toxic, you'll know very well what I'm talking about, because if you're in the wrong relationship, it's going to leave you feeling drained, especially at the end of the day. Because being around them was more draining than not, because of walking on eggshells and being in survival mode consistently and constantly. And yeah, So if you're in that type of environment or relationship, just try to remember to give it less energy. And if you're able to, and you're not like living with said person or married to said person or have kids with said person, then that should be a little bit easier for you to draw your energy back and eventually, pull back and get into the right relationship and detach from the vampire energy. And a lot of times it happens with family members too. Like you might notice that around the holidays or something, when you're hanging around certain family members, that it just drains your energy and you are exhausted. And again, that's typically part of being an empath, but sometimes just people draw more energy out of us than what they need to. I will say that. So if that happens to you, you can drop it in the comments. If you need help with boundary setting or taking your energy back from energy vampires, let me know. If you're looking to save money on your electrical bill from actual vampire energy, probably check out like some website somewhere. I'm not the go-to authority, just thought to be a little helpful in your day.